Hello. So I I had a really very strange dream last night. I had two dreams. But one of them I think applies to a situation that I think I've entered the other side of the healing process. And so now I think things are coming up that are a little deeper that I was like, what the hell is this about? So I'm going to tell you about my dream. So I had a dream. It's very strange. I don't remember all of it, but I remember at one point I was in a room with girls who I was kind of friends with. Kind of, sort of. There was one person that I hadn't a connection with. One of the people that I went on a date with once was in the dream, but I don't think she's significant. I think that she is symbolizing one of the friends that I was closer to or had like an established connection with, and no, I'm not even gonna say that. So anyways, but yeah, I was in a room with all of these girls, and it looks like we were on vacation somewhere like maybe like, it felt like it was somewhere in like the tropics, maybe in Mexico even. And there was these two guys there, and we were in the room, and the two guys were in the room, and it just got sexual, and we never ended up having like sex, but the energy was strange. It was all over the place, and it was only between the women, but the guys were there like watching, and it was like specifically mentioned in my dream, like my brain specifically noted that the guys were watching, and I continued to be unsure of how I wanted to engage, but it was a weird sexual energy. And it made me think, because then I woke up and I was already kind of in a sad mood, just kind of feeling sad, feeling down. And I woke up and I started thinking about an old friend group that I had. And I like had like this dream, this like daydream, that we had sat down for like a conversation. And I was just like going through what that conversation would have looked like. And I've had this daydream a bunch of times because I haven't spoken to those friends since I ended the friendship. So I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about what happens to women's relationships, like women's friendships in a group setting, and then with the added perspective of men like entering that friendship. So even though that dream was like in a sexual energy, I think the sexual energy was just meant to symbolize intimacy. And I think it was talking about like the way that women's friendships and how intimate they can also become like the way that queer relationships between women are hypersexualized or like fetishized. The same thing can happen between women's friendships, especially when viewed under the male gaze, whether that male gaze is intentionally viewing it in a way that is like the observer or not. You know, they could just be a presence in the space, or they could be actively asserting, you know, their perspective into the space, making us all aware. I hope that makes sense. And in the dream, I was the one that kind of got left, like I got put in a shitty position in the end, and it ruined the rest of my plans for the day. And it was just ended up getting left out, and I think it was symbolic for the way that friendship was with me, because it was a friend group that I was attempting to build intimate connections with people. But it was in a group setting, which is hard to make sure that you're getting, you know, that intimacy with every single person so that you feel like you could like hang out with everybody individually. And it was also weird because there was one person in which I had a stronger relationship with. And so it was hard not to get tied there, but also feel like you don't want to hold that person. And there's a lot happening in terms of like a balancing act. And then with the guys being added in, it could easily become performative. And I don't know what I'm trying to say. I think I'm just trying to say that there's like, from my personal experience, that there is a level of intimacy in women's friendships that could be akin to, like, I guess what, like not a sexual relationship, but like a romantic relationship. They're very similar. They can be very similar because, I guess, of how emotionally entwined things can become. And I don't know, I think I was just seeing how group dynamics between women can be complicated when everybody's trying to connect, but everybody is also like self-conscious and worried about what role they're playing. I don't know why Spirit had it come to me like an orgy, but I feel like it's because that's how intimate it is. Like, imagine having to participate in that. Not having, like imagine participating in that and trying to figure out how to balance what role you're playing in that dynamic, right? Because, like, threesomes and all, like, types of group sex, I mean, I think it takes a lot of confidence and, confidence in yourself to be able to be in that position, because it's weird, it's awkward having to figure out, what you're doing, what you're not doing, things like that. But yeah. Hi. But yeah, I'm okay. Give me a minute because I don't want to talk about this in front of everybody. So I'm gonna just like walk. Stop. The bugs in this park and insane. Anyways, so yeah, I think things become complicated. I think especially if you are also attracted to men, because your relationship and your friendship with these women is important, and you are trying to navigate becoming intimate. Don't take this sexually, but just intimate, right? And it's the same amount of vulnerability, perhaps even more, as when you're becoming sexually intimate with somebody. And it's with somebody of the same identity as you, so you really do connect on a different level. Not more or less, depending on who you are. For me, it is more, but it's on a different level, right? And so it becomes complicated enough when you're now dealing with several different people in a group dynamic that you're trying to build intimacy with. There's naturally going to be people who you don't connect with, and there's naturally going to be situations where people feel left out, people feel awkward, and the potential for things to become performative, also because you're either performing for the other women in that group, or now for the added perspective of the men who are now watching, you form intimate friendships with other women, and build that intimacy. Things can become performative, things can become defensive, people can become mean. And it's all because it's such a vulnerable dynamic. I was just thinking about it because this was the first friend group I'd ever had as like a teenager / adult that had men involved. I've always been friends with women and girls, and I had a really good friend who was a boy when I was like 5, and then after that I was never really close with boys. I didn't really build friendships with them. It was mainly with women and girls, because I was a girl and I'm a woman. But yeah, so I've never had to really deal with that dynamic. I didn't have to deal with it in high school, maybe a little bit in middle school, but not really. So high school, didn't have to deal with that. And then first year of university, I didn't really have to deal with that. It started during second year, when I had already began to form a friendship with these girls and we were building this intimacy. And then there was these guys that came in, and there were many reasons why the friend group didn't work out for me, between me. Like, I don't know what's happening with the friend group now. I think they're still friends. I would hope so. But there's many reasons why the friend group didn't work out with me. But I do think that the added perspective of men when everyone in the group was also attracted to men made it complicated, because you're just aware, and especially when you stop hanging out as just you girls and you start hanging out as a group with the guys, the ability to continue to build that intimacy between the women, it just becomes complicated. I don't exactly know why. I think part of it is because I found that guys tend to really take an observer role when it comes to being in a group setting with women and watching women create friendships amongst each other. They just tend to watch instead of also actively being vulnerable and engaged. And then they expect the women to cater to them and like bring them in, and instead of them getting involved themselves, which has to do with their own emotional insecurities. But that makes it hard as like the women who are trying to build a group energy, build an dynamic, because you do feel like you are the performer, because you're being watched, you are the entertainer, you're putting on a show. And so the way that you might be vulnerable and might build intimacy in a healthy way without the presence of these guys shifts once these guys, or just these people who are in observer roles, once these people are in the space. And I feel like I'm realizing that's what happened with my friend group. I already had problems and struggles before these guys came into the picture, but it became exacerbated afterwards. The struggles that I had before, I think had to do with different insecurities around the way that people present intimacy and build intimacy with each other. I felt insecure around what I brought to the table in terms of building an intimate relationship. I'm not super vulnerable. I don't really share a lot about me. I try to share what I can, and I'm starting to think that it might just be in my nature, because I'm a Cancer, and so even when I think I'm being vulnerable, I realize later on that there was a lot that I just don't bring up, and it's not purposeful. It's because I just don't. Like, I'm very protective over my privacy, I guess. But I do realize the ways that I'm willing to open up that shell depending on how safe I feel, right? Do I feel vulnerable or do I feel safe? And then trying to express why I feel vulnerable, why I feel in danger, is difficult because it's all intuitive. It's all feeling based. Yeah. Hi. So, yeah. I think that group friendships are hard. I think that you really have to know yourself. And you have to feel confident in your ability to be vulnerable. And if things get shaky and it's not okay after you are vulnerable, you have to be confident in your ability to pick yourself back up and not put up all these blocks because your vulnerability was rejected in that certain circumstance. I don't know. It's nice because this dream, the most random dream, it's giving me it's kind of taking me out of the situation and just putting me there as the observer, honestly, and beginning to just understand what happened. Why did things fall apart, right? I had all my own personal reasons why things didn't work out and what was going wrong, and but this metaphor was so perfect because it was personal enough to where I understood how it connected to me. Also, I mean, it's no coincidence that I immediately started thinking about my friend group after I had that dream, even though it wasn't a sexual relationship between any of the people in that group, and me. There was relationships, but not between me and anyone in the group. But it just connected because I think of how intimate I consider sex, and especially something like group sex and group friendships. I think I probably understand that level of intimacy. I could relate to it. Why I'm sharing this is because honestly I think that this is something that a lot of people deal with. Most of us end up in a group friendship at one point, and for many people it doesn't last, because group friendships are really hard to keep up, and it's even harder when you begin to merge friend groups. Oh my god, that is not always the best thing. Boundaries are important. But this has just been enlightening because I'm just getting to understand. And so at the end of the dream, things were very awkward after that moment. Nobody ended up having sex in the dream. It was just weird. It was just a lot of sexual energy and attempts to build intimacy and go there, but it never ended up going there. And I think that that's symbolic for my friend group as well, because there was a lot of attempts, and I was open to building that intimacy and building those connections, but ultimately never got there. And I do know that I put up blocks myself, but I have to be honest and say that I think I was justified in putting up those blocks because I could sense that the energy was not, it wasn't working well. It wouldn't have been able to thrive. The sex wouldn't have been good. The relationships wouldn't have been strong, and I didn't feel safe. I also didn't feel safe because there was that male observer energy that felt like it wasn't contributing to the space, but it was still there. And so it was just uncomfortable, and in the dream it didn't cause any major issues, but in my friendships, it kind of did, but didn't. All of the problems that came up for me were problems that were already there, that were highlighted by guys joining the group. So, I think this is also just talking about how complicated it is to balance friendships between men and women if there isn't mutual respect and mutual effort. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, because I do believe that men and women can be friends, but I think that there has to be a certain level of accountability for your behavior in a situation. I think a lot of the time guys kind of just slip by because they're I'm a presence of being a man, so I'm just that's how I contribute to this friendship, rather than doing the emotional work that the women do in that situation. So that's just something that came to mind. But this has all been good because this is really, it's helping me put things into context, I think, and understand what happened. And I think that I ended up kind of being the sacrifice. And I think I ended up just sacrificing myself, and it was a good sacrifice though, because I realized that things were never going to be what I wanted, what I hoped for it to be, what I aspired for. And I think that the same could probably be said for all the women. I think we were all aware that there were things that just weren't working, whether people wanted to say it or not. I think it was obvious, it was there, and it was felt, because it was obvious in the dream too. Even as we were all trying to do this weird thing, it wasn't working, which is why it never got there. Nobody, like, between all of the girls, no one did anything, you know, really sexual or really intimate. And it's because we could all feel that it wasn't meshing. Yeah, and the guys were really just, they were just like presences in the space. It was such an interesting dream now that I think about it. But yeah, the interesting part afterwards was we were like on the way to the airport. I don't know. We were like on the way out, like we were leaving and going home. And I was flying, and I had gotten 2 other girls tickets to fly with me. Like I had bought their tickets to go, and I had bought their tickets to fly out. And those 2 girls like ended up bailing on me and were like, we're driving. And they just all ended up driving and going a different direction while I decided to fly. And they ended up going to, like, they said that they were going to Rio, to Brazil. And I was like, wait, like I wasn't aware of any of this. And so then I got to the airport. I don't know how I got to the airport. I just got there, but they ended up leaving and going like a separate way, all of them together. And I was on my own at the airport. And then I was at the airport and I didn't have anything together. I didn't like have a COVID test. I couldn't find my flight information. I was a mess. I was just like on my own. And I think that was and like as I'm describing it, I'm like, this is ridiculous, but I do think that was symbolic for the way that friendship was, because not like they all abandoned me, but like we just went in completely different directions. And I'm unaware of whether I don't know what's happening in that friend group anymore, so I don't know if things have changed, like if people aren't friends anymore. I don't hope that on them, because I do think that they're actually very compatible, and I even think I was compatible with them just for a season, right? But yeah, I feel like I ended up being the sacrifice. And it's interesting because I've seen the way that I also brought together, like I brought in people into that friend group, or maybe just one person, and I tried to do play roles that I could to contribute to the space. But I think it was always obvious to me that I was never going to be a fundamental part of that group, like something that stayed forever. I felt like a temporary presence. But me putting myself in that position is what also got me stranded in the end, because it was like, girl, your lack of boundaries and your inability to communicate and know what's happening in a space, because you're not being present, you're not feeling what you're feeling enough to know, you're not talking enough to know what's happening with other people, you're not being engaged with also, is why you don't know where your flight tickets are, and you don't know what's happening. You don't know that they're going to Brazil. You don't know that those 2 friends were going to bail on you and betray you. Like, you know, all of these different examples. And those specific things that happen in the dreams are not like mirrors to what happened in real life. They're just, I think, spirits trying to give me, you know, examples so that I can connect it. But yeah, that dream was really interesting to me. And I totally understand why it was a sexual dream, but it didn't feel like a sexual dream. Like, it didn't feel like a sex dream. It just felt like there was sexual intimacy included, because that's the more blatant form of intimacy that we all recognize, that I think, you know, is the most obvious. And I think Spirit was trying to give me a very obvious example of what happened, like what this situation was like. And it was like that. It was like we all went on a vacation together, and everybody knows what they say about group vacations and group trips and how it destroys friendships. And we all went on this trip together, and we're trying to build, oh my God. And in that friend group, we went on a trip together, and that trip I cite as like the reason why things are not gonna work. And I knew it as one of the reasons because on that trip, the intimacy was so strange. And it's, yeah, I don't know. But it was also obvious that I was like, I knew the ways that I felt left out, and I knew the ways that I felt strange and not connected, oh my God, to the group. But I didn't do anything about it because I didn't know how to express what I was feeling. Oh. Oh my goodness. Go in there. Yeah, but like on that group trip, there's a lot of things around intimacy. For one, I felt completely disconnected from everyone in terms of having intimate connections. I didn't feel like I felt connected to anyone on that trip, even though I was trying to engage. So there's like me being in the role of like someone who's awkward and doesn't know how to be a part of like this group sex situation. It's actually very comedic that Spirit chose group sex, because it's just like, why in the hell? But I totally understand why they did that. But yeah, I was totally the one on the outs. Like, I didn't fit. And to be honest, if we're going based off the context of the dream, no one was fitting. No one was meshing. But I do think that there are beautiful friendships in that group. So I'm not even going to front. But yeah, it was weird. It was very, very weird. It was very, very weird. And there are moments where there's so many moments on that trip that solidified that it was not going to work. And I think after that trip ended, I knew for sure that it wasn't going to work. And I think that's probably why it ended the way it did in the dream, where I was just left on my own and we were going in two different directions, because I was fading away and I was lost in a chaos after that trip. I mean, I was already dealing with stuff, was already starting to come up. So I think that, there was no clarity that I was even getting home in that dream. I was just a mess. And I think that was symbolic for what the rest of the year and the next following year would be like for me. It was a mess trying to get back to myself, because I lost so much not just on that trip, but through that friendship. I lost a lot of myself, not really because of them, really just because of my own lack of boundaries and my own inability to be present in a situation and understand what's meant for me and what's not meant for me, and my own performance and my own, but then also the way that, there wasn't a lot of care for what I was comfortable with, and there wasn't a lot of space made. So it's on both sides. And it was interesting because I had that daydream I was saying in a conversation about like the friendship, and with those girls I sat down for lunch or something with them, and I spoke about my ability to take accountability, but that all of these things are a two-way street, and part of the healing process is knowing how you got yourself in a situation. I know how I got myself in that situation. There's no way I can be like, they were just bad friends to me. Like, no, not at all. I can't do that. And that's what I've been doing for this past year, because it's been like a year now, is literally just taking my accountability and working through all of my bullshit. And now I think that Spirit gave me this dream so that they could be like, okay, you understand this, you see how this connects to you, and now I think I also have the space to no longer have to carry all the weight. Like, I can also recognize that dynamic was uncomfortable overall, and the situation wasn't working overall, and there was a lot of roles that everybody was playing, and everybody was doing something that didn't make sense, and everybody was not serving themselves. Like, we were all in a very strange place and constantly neglecting our own boundaries. I think we all had boundary issues, and we all weren't serving ourselves, weren't doing what served us, It's definitely one of those learning experiences, and all of that is very freeing, because it means that it wasn't like a messy and horrible toxic dynamic where, I hate these people because they betrayed me. Like, I really have nothing but love for these women. I love them so much. It's actually annoying. And I can't see them negatively, because I understand that we were kids trying to grow up and find ourselves and build friendships, and we were building community, and we were a bunch of Black girls, and it was so nice to have that connection. But things are complicated. But yeah, this dream was good because it was a release for me. And even the conversation afterwards, like in my daydreams, in the several daydreams I've had about having a conversation with that group, I've always kind of struggled to really stand up for myself, and really like, I've taken accountability, but I struggle to not just apologize, to also voice what they did wrong, or what I felt, or how I felt hurt. And this time around, I was able to say everything I needed to say, and maybe more things will come up, but I think that this is kind of like, Spirit's like, okay, you see it now, and you see all sides, And yeah, I'm very, very grateful for that dream. And I guess I wanted to share it because I do think that these friendship dynamics are not unique to just me and, those old friends. I think that it's something that first of all, I think that all women and all girls in friend groups go through a variation of this, and understand that intimacy process, that building of intimacy, and how complicated it can be, and how much it cannot work, and how much it's sometimes really just an energy thing. Like, you just don't vibe, which I think is why that they're not even an ex, that one date person, the person who represented one of the friends for me, but who I went on a date with once, like, there was nothing wrong with either of us. We just didn't vibe. We just didn't jive. And so even when we had a good time, because I had a great time on the date, it just wasn't going to work in the long run. But I was in denial about that for a little bit. Like, I still wanted to go on a second date, but they were the ones that were like, no, let's not go out again. So good for them, because they set the boundary when I was not able to. I wanted to go on another date, but I think Spirit was giving me even closure with that, because I've seen that person twice now, which was so weird. I've seen them twice in the past 2 months. Once at a concert and once just riding their bike, and I was like, oh wow. But yeah, I was even sad about that for a while, and that was the first time I'd ever gone on a date with a woman. So that was also my first queer experience with women. So there's a lot of loose ends being tied up through this dynamic, and I think that it's even purposeful that Spirit made it a kind of queer experience in that dream, because I think all friendships between women are also queer experiences, because like I said, the level of intimacy that is built and connection is not a joke. That shit can be really deep, and there's a lot of caretaking that's happening that's intimate, that you wouldn't, that I don't know if it exists in friendships with men. I don't know, because I don't have friendships with men, and that's not because I don't want to. It's just because I haven't met a guy that I've wanted to be friends with since my childhood friend Trevor. But yeah, it's very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. And I also got the vibe that in the dream that most of the women were, even though they were participating in this queer experience, I'm not sure if they identified fully as queer, which would also match my friend group, because as far as I know, only 2 of the other girls were also openly queer along with me. So yeah, it was just it's grounding, and I think it's important to see it this way, because it just takes a lot of the pressure off, because then you realize what a ridiculous situation you were in, and it was just there was no way to win. You just had to go through it. You just had to go through it and get out on the other side, and it was going to be rough. It's a long recovery road, and it's painful, and I think I'm so grateful for the dream also, because Spirit made it clear where I was being hurt or betrayed, and I struggle to give myself that. I struggle to be well, they did this to me, or this happened that hurt me. And I think that was important, because if I didn't get that from outside confirmation, I think it would always kind of be a tug of war between me and myself and I. And so that was just also kind of nice. So yeah, but I also don't even know if I would have had this connection or been able to build this relationship and this understanding had I not been doing all this healing. I feel this is in response to the spiritual insurance video I just filmed. But yeah, you guys, I just wanted to share this, and I'm gonna post this because I don't feel it's so personal that it's nobody's business. And I don't name anybody's names. I don't feel the friend group even watches my videos, but if they did, I don't think they'd have a problem with this. So yeah, I'm gonna go get Starbucks now. Goodbye.